Hello, ladies and gents, and welcome to another episode of the Finnovator. And again, I want to share something from my coaching. I want to share a module that I created to help advisors have what I call difficult conversations. The background to this is a while ago. I remember when I first came on board as a consultant. This is way back when I'd come out of corporate. I'd spent a year traveling around the world. I'd come back, put on my suit for the first time. I was back in the corporate world. And I'll never forget my first ever meeting. I walked into a room with a gentleman who was the head of a licensee at the time. The licensee is no longer around. Let's just say he was known for being a formal gentleman, very, very formal, formal old school ties and formal old school suits and all the rest of it. And he was known for being particularly, how can we put it, unforgiving of young pups. And to say that I was a young pup, I wasn't young, but I certainly was, wet behind the ears, getting back into corporate after a long, well, not even corporate, getting back into, what I was doing after a long period out. And I probably, in retrospect, looked at it and I was probably not as prepared as I did. But he turned what could have been a very nice, friendly conversation into something that was very, very much something difficult. It was awkward, difficult, and made me come out of there feeling very different to the way I walked in. And it was through that experience and a few other conversations that I made a decision at some point that I wanted to be one of those coaches who was very comfortable playing in what I call the awkward. What I mean by that is I want to be someone that when it was a difficult conversation, when the topic was hard, when you were having to deliver messages or talk about something in a really direct way, I wanted to be able to have those conversations in a way that I was comfortable, that I could do it, I could handle it, I could manage all the intricacies of it and ultimately come out of it in better shape than I went in. I think it was Tony Robbins, he probably got it from someone else, I don't know, but said the quality of your business career or your success in business will be directly attributable to the number of awkward conversations you come through. And I don't know if you've had this experience sometimes when you go into an awkward conversation and you come out of the other side of it with a better relationship with the person that you've spoken to, or being clearer, and it's cleared a whole bunch of stuff up. That's not to say every conversation goes like that, but I love it when you take something that could potentially be quite disruptive or destructive or difficult to deal with, and you turn it into something that makes you closer, stronger, more intimate, whatever it might be. You got a stronger basis, and that's what this is about. Today's episode of the Finnovator is called Difficult Conversations. This is a piece of training taken directly from our curriculum, unpacking some of those difficult conversations about pricing, conversations about when clients are asking you why you haven't done this, and that's not something that's your remit. Clients who won't get back to you, who won't play their part of the bargain, and a whole bunch of other examples that I hopefully are going to be useful. And I'm really going to dive deep in here. This is one of those ones that when it comes to what I do, I like to get really practical. And that means giving you a script, giving you a methodology, and I'm going to share some of those scripts, albeit in audio form. So as always, if you like this content, and in particular, if you like the new direction where we're supplementing a lot of the traditional content that we put out by the Finnovator, which is typically about interviewing practice owners who've got really interesting stories to tell, people who run really interesting practices or subject matter experts who just know their stuff and can add value. We're supplementing it with some of the stuff taken directly from the curriculum. So if you like it, the biggest compliment you could do is head down to the feedback section of your particular podcast client. Give us a review. Obviously, more stars, the better. And most importantly, just give us a bit of a written review. Let us know, who this podcast, let others know rather, who the podcast is for, what it's about, and why they may want to pay attention. But with that said, let's get stuck into some difficult conversations. Cool. So difficult conversation. It's funny, when I was putting this together, what I actually wanted to call it was awkward conversations. But I knew that if I call it awkward conversations, people were even less likely to come to that if we call it difficult conversations. So I ended up calling it difficult conversations. And it's for a reason I'm going to sort of share in a moment. It's something that I have naturally gravitated towards more and more. I've done what I did. Obviously, as a coach, I think it's important to do that. But let me just sort of give you a bit of context first. For me, if you look at the journey to scale, or the journey leverage, I should say, if you are reaching that point where you have a team behind you and working underneath you, and you are still not comfortable having these awkward conversations, for me, that's a bit of an issue. And I know some people will move away from it, but if you're going to get a group of people and you want to be the leader and you want them to, frankly, get them to do what you need them to do, then being able to step into this spot where there is friction or people are not doing what they should do, That's key. Obviously, it's useful before that, but if you reach this point in your business and this is still not in your locker, then I think it can cause a bunch of issues. So the big idea behind this awkward conversations is, as I said, a while ago, I read a book by a lady called Susan Scott called Fierce Conversations. I don't know if anyone's read it. Okay. And it was a really interesting conversation at the time because as the topic said, it really focused down on the power that having certain types of conversations and the impact that could have on your life, work, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I actually, one of my beliefs that has stemmed from that is I believe that 95% of the world's problems stem from communication issues. And it's funny, we send our kids to school and we teach them all of these practical skills, but maybe it's changed. I don't remember anyone sitting down at school and going, hey, let's sit you down and talk about how to diffuse an argument. Let's sit you down and talk about how to handle it when you've got two different positions, different viewpoints. Let's talk about how to deal with it when you're meeting someone who goes against every value you've got in your bone, right? And I'd probably suggest that if we had this ability to do that, maybe a lot of the issues that we're seeing now with bipartisanship would move away. But this really struck a chord with me. And I at that point in time, I was like, this is a skill set that I wanted to create, the ability to sit down and what I call play in the awkward. In other words, be someone who goes, okay, that's a really awkward situation. That's a difficult conversation to have, and just go, I'm going to have it. And be able to kind of be able to not only have the conversation and put things on the table that were maybe hard for people to hear, but they had to hear it, but do it in a way that was respectful and polite and wouldn't get people's heckles up. Does that make sense? And then when I started this version of the business, I went to Tony Robbins's the unlock the power within, unleash the power. Anyway, and he came out with this comment, which I think is real. I totally believe in this, which is a person's success in life can usually be measured by the number of uncomfortable conversations they're willing to have. In truth, you'd probably turn around and say the person's success in life can be measured by the number of times they're willing to put themselves in uncomfortable situations. When I was part of Corporate to Freedom, we had this 6-week course curriculum that we put entrepreneurs who are people in corporate who wanted to come out and do the startup thing. And one of the exercises we make them do at the end of week one, their homework, is to say, okay, your homework for week one is I want you to go out with a friend into a public place, and I want them to film you while you lie down in the middle of this public place. If anyone comes up to you, you can't tell them, oh, my friend's filming you. You've got to go, no, I'm just fine. And we did this because ultimately the idea was that in entrepreneurship, you have to question the rules. You have to question why people do certain things. And you realize very quickly that there are far fewer rules than we impose ourselves. But forcing people to do that gets them to sit outside of their comfort zone. Feel free to try it, by the way, if you feel like it, because it's good to stretch. But again, for me, having uncomfortable, awkward, difficult conversations every single time you do it, and you do it successfully and comes off the back of it, you build that muscle, you build that superpower, if that makes sense. The kind of conversation I'm talking about, and I've approached the training today, I'm going to give you some examples, and I'm going to give you some templates that you can apply if you're going to have certain conversations. But I've approached this by pulling together some ideas and concepts and ways of approaching these that have really helped me. I think when I look at people who are good at doing it, these are the things they tend to do. And I think when you've got sort of tools and frameworks you can apply to situations, it makes it easier than just having scripts. But the kind of conversations I think, I'm talking about are the conversations. To be honest, I think, and we'll touch on this in a second, I think 90% of the time, that awkward conversation that you think it's going to come when it comes to fees just isn't at all. Value conversations, which is kind of a similar sort of conversation, but it's taking it to the next level. It's taking it down. Client exit conversations are sometimes awkward, or conversations where the client is, why should I stay with you? Because it kind of puts you under pressure to pitch yourself. Behavior reset conversations is when someone's just not behaving right. They're not doing what they're expected of it. Daryl, expectation versus reality conversations, market performance and that sort of stuff. The I was wrong conversations, or the even more awkward, you were wrong conversations. Are there any other awkward conversations that you think we should include in this list? Daryl, what do you think?
I think at the time we've got, Stu, you've captured the bulk of it.
Yeah, I thought about making a long list, and I was like, you can pretty much put them all in there. Chloe, what about you? Have we captured most of them there?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think Elizabeth, feel free to jump in if you've got I think you put your hand up there for a second. Cool, I'm just going to keep going. So I want to know, just take a moment, what's the most awkward conversation you've ever had to have? take a moment if you haven't got one that comes to mind. But I'll share mine if you like to kick it off. My partner at Corporate to Freedom was a lovely guy called Johan, like a South African guy. He came from Pretoria, I believe. Lovely guy. There was, awkward conversations with peers. Yeah. But the issue with Johan is he stank. He had a smell about him that was kind of like his clothes smelt. And I think it might have been that he wasn't drying them. And that's a conversation that as a partner of somebody you have to have. And that was without doubt the most awkward, because to sit down with someone, so there's something we need to talk about, by the way. That was awkward. That was an awkward conversation. Definitely one of the most awkward I've ever had to have. Darryl, what about you?
I can't think of any that comes to mind, but your conversation regarding your business partner brought one back for me when I first started work. We had this poor lady in our little section in the department. I was working for one of the major banks, and it was my first job. And she did have a problem. And the conversation, the team was, how the hell do we actually raise it with her? And no one could come up with a diplomatic solution. And in the end, one of the guys said, I'm going to get a can of Rexona and put it on her desk, which is what happened.
I have to feel like that's not the best solution. Like, I've heard that before, and I still think that out of all of the ways you could deal with it, like, that's the one. Firstly, you got no guarantee she's going to make the connection. Secondly, I just can't imagine.
But the conversation wasn't had. I mean, that was
that was the solution.
Amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
And we didn't talk with her. And I now forget what happened after that.
Yeah.
Whether she moved on or whether it was resolved. But that part of it actually sticks in my head.
Oh, that's funny. Chloe, what about you?
I think the most awkward conversations I've had to have is where we're doing new insurance for clients who, for one reason or another, can't do tele-underwriting. And so I'm the one asking the very personal questions.
Yeah. It's when you get to that section about, have you ever sexual intercourse with, those are the awkward ones.
That's the one
right?
that I was thinking of. Yeah.
That's the awkward one. No, I absolutely agree, which is why one of the reasons why tele-underwriting is such a great option. You get someone else to have the conversation. Elizabeth, what about you?
I think most recently we put out a publication that someone else really liked, and we said, you're welcome to use this. And then they went, oh, well, we'll have to use it and put our brand all over it. And I'm going, what? How does that happen? And I couldn't figure out a way of saying get lost or this is our IP, or because he's someone whose work I really respect. And I spent a lot of time trying to sort out how to do it.
And did you work out a solution?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Okay, well, good. That is awkward because you've got a situation where you've got someone you look up to and they're stealing you. I mean, they're behaving in not a great way. So yeah. That's a really good example. I'll give you one more example, and this is kind of a funny one. My first day at Hillross, Darryl, I'm there, I've got my suit on, I'm like, okay, and I go in. Remember the level we were at? There was those toilets kind of behind the frosting. Anyway, I went in there and I went to the loo and I flushed the loo, and the water came up, and whatever was in the loo, which I'd created, had blocked the loo, and the water didn't stop coming up. It came over the top, and I'm like leaning back, and then eventually it stops, and there's water all over the floor, and there's brown sharks. I'm like, what do I do? Okay, so I ran out to my desk. I put a note on the door, out of order. I went straight to reception and said, look, I've just went into the toilet. I don't know what someone's done in there, but I put a thing on the door. It's definitely out of order. That was my response to the awkward. So that's the most awkward conversation I chose not to have. But anyway. I don't think I've told that publicly. Well, now I have. Okay, let's just jump in. That's great. I think insurance one is such a good example as well. Such a good example of one of those at play. I think the challenge is when you don't have a way of dealing with these conversations, you kind of go into unprepared. I'll never forget when my first meeting with anyone from a licensee when I was part of the Elixir group was with Peter Daly, who was the head of AFS at the time. And I went in there, happy days, all the rest of it, and he just tore chunks out of me. Like I hadn't experienced, I didn't know what I was doing. And I was just like, oh, I was like a rabbit in the headlights. I never made the mistake of being unprepared as I was there. But that's what happens if you don't have a way of dealing with it, and you just hits you with all your shields down. You just end up in that. I don't know what to say. I think sometimes the other problem is when you get involved in these difficult conversations, and you can get involved in the wrong role. You end up being the appeaser or the pleaser or the person who's trying to help, hence the Bernard, rather than realizing that sometimes the worst thing you can do in these awkward conversations is try and remove the problem or remove yourself from the awkward. And I think that's really, really sort of challenging. Obviously, the other one is you can get personal, which is really hard when it's an awkward conversation, and particularly when it's about what you do. Like fee conversations are often so closely tied to how you perceive your value, and your value is perceived. In other words, it can very easily get personal. When it's personal, suddenly you've entered this emotional aspect into it. I think worst case scenario, if you have too many of them, it kind of like batters you down and you end up kind of just drained by it, particularly if you don't have a way of dealing with it. I think though, if you have a method and a way of getting them, reading them front on, you go into them ready. And I know it's a bit of an aggressive image, but you've got an arsenal behind you. You're ready. You've got certain things you can put out there to delay the process, to go deeper before you kind of try and solve the problem. You approach them on an equal footing, which is really important. If you're an awkward conversation, you want to be on that king to king, queen to queen, queen to king, king to queen. You want to be on that equal footing. There's nothing worse than being on the back foot in these conversations and with someone who's just going to push forward. That's not where you want to be. I think one of the things that's useful when you have these conversations is its ability to step back and see it from a much higher perspective. Instead of going, oh my God, we're having an awkward conversation about this thing. You go, well, hold on, what's this really about? How did it come about? And then you can attack the source of the problem rather than manifestation. And I think eventually, if you get this right, you end up actually enjoying them. Like one of the things I loved about, I know not everybody's a boxing fan, but the Fury White fight was, Tyson Fury is just an amazing boxer. But to see two fighters who've had such a great fight, and at the end of it, the pugilists, they've gone at each other, they're friends. And that's the thing. I told the story about Johan, and one of the benefits of coming through that process was Johan and our relationship was stronger than ever before. Because when you can have that kind of conversation and have an awkward conversation about someone's body odor, but do it in such a way that they recognize that you're doing them a favor, and it's not focused on criticizing them, but it's focused on trying to help them solve a problem that may be manifesting itself. Suddenly it strengthens things. Does that make sense? Cool. So I wanted to ask, have you ever had an experience like a Johan thing, or where you've had an awkward conversation, but off the back of it, the outcome has been stronger? You've been able to work with that client better, or alternatively, the relationship's been better. Has anyone had that? No. Okay. Cool. Sort of 5 key strategies. I'm going to jump into them, and they're things that have sort of really helped. And again, some of these are drawing from, the fierce conversations, and some of it's just things I picked up along the way. I think the most important strategy whenever you're having an awkward conversation, whether it's about fees, whether it's about performance, is, it seems really obvious, but be in the moment. I used to do a lot of speaking gigs. At one point, I was doing 2 speaking gigs, on average, 2 speaking gigs a month. And I was flying around and I remember one time I came to do the gig and someone said, yeah, it's going to be 50 people in a room. And it turned out to be 500. And I don't think at that point I'd ever spoken to 500 people in a room. It's funny, everybody's got a bit of people either like public speaking or they hate it. No one's like, yeah, I can give it or take it. I mean, who here, just to understand, who likes getting up in front of a room and speaking? Yeah. Darryl, I'd imagine you would. No?
Not naturally,
okay.
but I had to do it.
So one of the things I noticed is when I was, and it was this particular time, I was sort of sat there and at my table, and there was 2 more speakers to go. There were 500 people in the room, and I was nervous. I was like sat there. I was going through my notes, and I put my notes down. I forget what my notes were, and then I'd be like getting nervous. And at that point in time, there was another speaker next to me. We got chatting about it, and obviously she must have noticed that I was nervous, because I'm not sure how the conversation came around, but she shared this absolute beautiful bit of advice, and she said, the reason why people get nervous before they're speaking is because they're not in the moment. At the point in time they're getting nervous, they're sat there worrying about forgetting their lines, or this is my tie straight, or am I sweating onto my, whatever it might be. They're thinking about all the bad things that might happen. They're putting themselves in the future. And she said she's found the easiest way to just cut the nerves is stop thinking about the future and start focusing on the present. She said, when you're up there, she said, the best thing, I tend to focus on what people are doing in the audience. What's the temperature in the room? Is there a fan going? And it's interesting. As soon as I started doing that, the nerves just went bang, gone. Because it's actually impossible to get nervous about something if you're just focusing on the moment. Does that make sense? Same goes. If sometimes I find when people are having awkward conversations, I don't know, Chloe, you said you don't normally gravitate towards this. When you get this sense that this is going to be an awkward conversation, and I've had it, you get this feeling in your stomach, right? Oh no, here we go. And in that moment, what's happening? Here we go. You're projecting forward. Does that make sense? You're like, this is going to be bad. This is going to, this. And in your mind, suddenly all these ideas are going about, is he going to ask me this, fee conversation? Oh, this isn't going to be good. I'm going to put the number in front of it and I'm going to be nervous, and you're putting pressure on yourself about what's to come. And the problem is once you get out of that moment, you're no longer actually present in what's going on. And secondly, equally importantly, you're no longer noticing what's going on the other side. And Daryl, you're a big student of this kind of stuff. But ultimately, if you focus on what's going on the other side of the table when you're talking to someone, they will tell you everything you need to know about their mental state, about how we as humans give off so much information second by second about what's going on. It's insane. You could get a whole narrative about it. So the strategy for me is I've found whenever an awkward conversation, whenever I'm doing something which is going to stretch me outside, the moment I spot myself starting to get nervous or starting to think about what's going on, I pull back. I just go, what's going on in the room? What's the smell? What's the feeling? What's the temperature? Does that make sense? So whether it's public speaking or it's having an awkward conversation or it's just having your first appointment discussion, if the longer you can just drop the future thing, not worrying where it's going to go, the better it's going to be. And funnily enough, I find that once you know your stuff, if you just kind of let yourself run on autopilot a little bit, you'll find your way there anyway. Does that make sense? So that's the first one. I found that really incredibly useful. The second strategy, I think, is and I imagine anybody who's done the recent exams will know this. Know your biases. The moment you can understand what might be driving certain people, the easier it is for you to go, okay, I know where this is coming from. The big one I sort of noticed, particularly with fees, is anchoring. You guys familiar with anchoring? Darryl, yeah? Yeah, okay. For those who aren't, anchoring is the tendency for us to use a certain arbitrary point of comparison for anything else. So for example, have you ever noticed how when people are asked the cost of advice, like, I don't know, about $300, right? Now, do you wonder where that number comes from? What do most people understand that lawyers and accountants charge per hour? $300. How long does the first appointment take? An hour. So instantly, most people will be anchored by that. Performance benchmarks are often, when people go, I've underperformed, what they're possibly doing is anchoring themselves to a number that you know nothing about. For example, if I said, I got you 5% last year, who'd be happy with that? Yeah. What if everybody else got 25%? That's rubbish. What if everyone else got minus 40%? Super happy. Again, this is the whole thing. If you're having a performance conversation about returns, one of the best ways of saying, okay, I take your concern. Can I just understand what is your comparison point? And in reality, the only comparison point that makes is this return as part of the whole thing? Is this going to enable you to achieve your goals? Yes or no? If it's such a blip that we need to do something about it, then yeah, that might be worth looking at. Availability, heuristic. That's another bias, which is really interesting. It's when people see something in front of them a lot, they assume it has weight. So for example, if your client comes to you and said, I've read 4 articles today, I should get in Bitcoin. Are they basing that on it's a smart idea to get in Bitcoin? Are they basing it on the fact that 4 people told them to get into Bitcoin? You with me? Again, if you know that that's a bias, you can immediately step into a situation and go, look, my job as your advisor is to point out how to make smart decisions. Can I just jump in and share with you something that I know? I know that sometimes when people see a lot of information about something, they place overall weight on it. You've read 4 articles on Bitcoin and they're all telling you the same thing. How many articles you read telling you Bitcoin's rubbish? You with me on that? There's a whole bunch of other blind spot bias is another one, and I'll look at confirmation bias is very active in social media. It's where if you go onto YouTube and you type in video, why the earth is flat. Guess what's going to come up in your feed from there on in? And the more videos you watch of why the earth is flat, guess what? People who make money out of property, they instantly think property's the way forward. There's no other option. I literally was in a car going down to Canberra with a friend of mine who's a property developer, and he was saying, I would invest in I invest in property every single time over shares because I control the property. I'm like, yeah, but comparing shares to property is not the right thing. Comparing property to owning a share in a company that you own, that's the comparison. Otherwise, it's direct listed properties to share portfolios. Does that make sense? So again, redressing that kind of stuff. I'll give you this, but I personally love looking at people's biases because one of my favorite bumper stickers says, "Don't believe everything you think." But one of the easiest things to do when you're faced with one of these awkward conversations, and I'll show you another model in a second, is take a moment to step back and realize sometimes the best route is to challenge people's thinking, the basis of their thinking in a respectful way, and using valid financial arguments like this and science that shows, you know what? Humans are very bright, but we also are very prone to believing a little bit too much of what we want to believe. Daryl, you're nodding away. Give me, you've obviously had some experience in this. Give us some insight.
Okay, so one of the things I do with my clients every single year, and it's that time of the year right now, is give them the Vanguard index chart. The Vanguard index charts come out for 2022 as at June 30, and my clients have now been getting them every year, 15 years. And essentially that's a reinforcement tool and technique that I use to get them used to financial market volatility and returns. And that works an absolute treat.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, anything you can do to challenge thinking that's flawed at the root cause rather than just trying to, particularly if you've got a client and you want them to do X and they want to do Y, instead of going, Y is better, no, X is better, go, well, hold on a moment. Let's just explore why you think Y is better and whether your decision-making is based on valid data inputs.
So just to give you another example, I'm doing the ethics course at the minute, and then I'm done with my FASIA accreditation.
Yay!
And surprise, surprise, the group assignment that was handed in on Monday was all about this couple that had won the lottery and they wanted to put the money to Bitcoin. And we had to provide all the reasoning and theories and so on as to why you wouldn't run with the client's direction to you. But if people come in with that preconceived idea, then I spend quite a bit of the time unpacking their reasonings behind it. I mean, they're doing it, why they're thinking like that, and see whether I can actually counter it with alternative points of view or whether it is too far embedded that all we're going to be doing is debating their merits and my merits, and they'll still walk away knowing they've got the right answer. At that point, my objective in the meeting is to get them out of there respectfully and gently and move on to the next client.
Love it. There's actually one I've realized we haven't covered in here, which is called loss aversion, which is people's propensity to want to avoid loss, or they place greater value on avoiding loss than they do on gain. And you can actually use this to your benefit. If a client is coming in and going, oh, I think I'm going to go look for another advisor, I think I need to change my strategy, or one of the things you can turn around and say, okay, let's unpack that. In order to change the strategy, you need to drop everything here. In other words, you need to go back to the beginning. If you want to go and find an advisor, that's fine, but you have to understand the moment you go and see another advisor, I'm not your advisor anymore. They're going to have to go through the same process of fact find. They'll probably charge you for advice. And at the end of it, there's no guarantee you're necessarily going to get a better strategy. So before you do, I don't mind if you make the decision. Can we just explore what it is that's missing from our relationship, which you think is going to be better by going elsewhere? And that conversation on its own is one of the things that will trigger people to think really clearly about, I've only thought about whether there's potential gain. What about the things I'm likely to lose? Does that make sense?
And this is where the Vanguard chart again comes in pretty handy. Yeah. Discussion with them about what the volatility will look like going forward. I say to them, let's assume you've just put your money in on the 1st of November 2007, which is about the time the share market's actually peaked.
Yep. Time in.
And let's now assume I'm looking across the table at you on the 6th of March 2009. 16 months of markets actually heading down, not knowing that this is now the bottoming of the market. And you put in blah, which is the money they're looking to invest right now, and your money is now negative, whatever it is, 33%, what have you. And then I say to them, how do you feel right now?
I love that question.
And there's nothing like using real money, real historical returns, and then saying to them, what do you think?
Yeah.
Because then there's a number of other strategies I roll out to get them through that volatility. And right now I'm doing that, for example, with clients on pensions, where I'm saying to them, look, it's going to be volatile for the next 12, 18 months, who knows? But do you want to put 2 years of your pension income into cash and term deposits to get you through this volatility, so you're not looking to get out completely from your 70-30 strategy, for example?
Ironically, one of the beliefs that historical performance is an indicator is also a bias in itself. But nonetheless, in this case, it can be a useful one. Chloe, is this useful?
Incredibly useful.
Okay, good. Because I find this stuff is great when you're having conversations and challenging people to revisit their thinking. When you understand these elements, and there's so many of them, you've really got some basis on which to have these conversations. Should we look at another one? Cool. This is another strategy which is kind of it's one for you personally or me personally. It's called assessing an inference, and this tool here is called the ladder of inference, and it is incredibly useful for kind of not only interpreting your version of events, but also understanding where people come from. And it's based on the idea that at any point in time, the world is made up of what we call available data or observable reality, right? What is actually happening? And what we do as human beings is we filter it. We don't naturally pay attention to everything. We only take selective data. You know, the whole thing about if I told you to look around the room now and look at everything that's blue and then look at the screen and say what was red. There's red stuff in the room, but you didn't pay attention to it because I selected it out. And it's the same true. Like people tend to pay attention to certain data and they miss other data. There's a great experiment called the missing gorilla. And it's literally a video of people playing basketball. And you have to watch them and count the number of passes they make. And at the end of it, they go, did you see the gorilla? You don't, because humans select it out. So what we do is we select the data we want and we interpret it. We interpret the meaning of the data. We make assumptions about the data. We reach conclusions. We put those conclusions through our own personal belief, and then we translate that into actions. Does that make sense? Which means two people can look at the same data set and act in completely different ways. I'll give you an example of this that I've often used. I have an Aunt Rose, and Aunt Rose is not my aunt. She's one of my mum's friends. Took me a while to work that one out, but anyway. And one time, this is 10 or 15 years ago, I was over in Perth, and she says, Stuart, you're looking very prosperous. And I looked and I went, and at the time I was feeling a bit tubby, and I was like, in my head, I'm like, you horrible lady. I've been here 2 minutes and you're calling me fat. I'm not talking to you anymore. So what happened there is I'd heard one piece of the conversation. I'd interpret it as basically as meaning I was fat. I'd assumed she was being nasty. I concluded she wasn't a nice person. I believed that I didn't want anything to blah, 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 blah. So, but the moment I stopped, I went, hold on a mo. That's an inference. And I went, Rose, what do you mean? She says, you're so well dressed. So I went from basically disowning my auntie to taking a compliment. And that's kind of an example of inference. So the benefit of this is when you hear a client turn around and say, for example, I'll give you a really clear example. They ask a question, you put the fees on the table and they go, I just want to ask you about the fees. And you suddenly jump in and go, you'll get full value for them. We can break them down. We can make it easier. It's cool. We can break them into payments, right? You've inferred that the comment about fees is a challenge on their whether the value or this, when in fact it could be, and often is how do we pay you? In other words, do we have to pay you now, or can we pay you later? Does that make sense? And this is the thing. I personally hate talking to people about objection handling. I can't think of another better word of dealing with it. But sometimes objections are not objections; they're just questions. How do we pay you? Can we afford it? And sometimes there's objections which actually, you need to go, yeah, that's definitely a problem. That's definitely something you need to be mindful of, and you just leave it alone. Does that make sense? So the ladder of inference is a really good way of when you're in a conversation and you can feel yourself being drawn to a conclusion, you can kind of stop and go, hold on a moment. What's actually going on here? Is this really about fees? Is this a client who's really upset with me? Is the client, is it possible the client could be upset with someone else? come in and I'm really sensitive to Rachel being in a grumpy mood in the kitchen. I'm like, something I've done. And I go, babe, is it something I've done? She says, no, nothing you've done. This is happening. I go, okay. And then I can drop it. You know what I'm talking about? Ladder of influence, incredibly powerful. Okay, 2 more. Side chair strategy is one of my faves. I have, on a number of occasions, I've been in a situation where a conversation turns adversarial. You ever had that conversation where it suddenly, instead of being a conversation about something, it becomes, you did this. No, that's not the way it is. No, that's the way it is. Remember? And I think whenever I get in this situation, the problem with adversarial conversations like you against them is they tend to get this binary thing. And the more and more you have these conversations, the longer and longer it becomes harder for parties to back out of. One of the things I love from Japan, I think it's a Chinese thing as well, is face. This idea that you have to give people a way out. You can argue a point, but you always have to be able to defer some aspect of it. So when you give up, you're having an argument, and even if you're right, you always give people the ability to be a little bit right, even though they're wrong. And it's a great way of working. It's on something I've taken a lot from Japan. But I always think when I'm having an argument with somebody, when they're saying, your fees are too high, for example, the classic thing, I look at it and I go, oh, we're having that conversation where there's a boardroom table and I'm on one side and you're on the other. And I imagine myself grabbing the chair and pulling it around to the side of the table and going, you know what, I'm with you. Those fees are higher than they used to be. But let me explain why that horrible business coach or our business has had to increase the fees. Can you see the difference? And this is about kind of not making it personal. Like if a client turns around and says, I don't think I want to work with you anymore. I'm not happy with the way it's working. You could make that personal. You pull it around and go, you know what? From time to time, some of our clients do decide they don't want to work together. So why don't we have a chat and work out whether that offer or the way we're working is right for you? And if it's not right for you, why don't we sit down and work out either the best way to do it? Alternatively, I'll help you to find a way around it. Does that make sense? Just changes the dynamic because it's just someone else explained it to me. Be like a door. You know those doors on kitchens? They go the what do they call the doors on the hinges? They come out and they go doop 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 doop. Be like that. The moment someone has a crack at you, just go whoop on that door, and you just don't get caught. Side chair strategy is brilliant, but as an image, being able to move yourself around to the side of the table works every time. Final one, I think, is really key. I love this saying, Naval Ravikant. I actually thought it was Donald Trump for a while, but I'm glad to say it wasn't. Negotiations are won by those who care less. Now, it sounds, when you say it like that, it sounds really kind of, don't worry about anything. But the point he's trying to make is if you're going into a situation where you want a certain outcome, you want to retain that client, you want to convert that client into your appointment, you've got to make sure that client comes across because they're a really valuable client. By definition, you give the power in the conversation to the other person because you're the one chasing and they'll know it. Alternatively, if you can go in there and go, for whatever reason, I am comfortable if this conversation goes either way, by definition, you are more likely to have a situation where the outcome is either going to be more in your favor or at least more balanced. Does that make sense? Like you will have had this. How many times you sat in front of a client and you just like really, really want to convert this client, really, and it doesn't quite work. And then you sit in front of the client and go, no, I don't want to convert. This is not a client for me. And guess who comes on board? And that is this in action. So one of the best things you can do in going into these conversations is, prepare, understand the outcome you want, but the moment you walk in there, try and remove the emotional aspect to it because it'll make it much easier. Cool. What's either hitting home for you? What's been most useful? Alternatively, is there anything that's reminded you of something that you do well, or alternatively want to sort of continue to do well? Daryl, I'm going to start with you. What's hit home for you?
Anchoring is really important, stewarding these fee conversations. And,
yeah.
I'm a big hoarder of newspaper articles and any articles I see, trade magazines, that sort of stuff on fees at the moment.
Yep.
So I have them in my kit bag when I'm actually talking to clients about fees. And if they haven't got a number in their head, then I can put a number in front of them from credible third parties like KPMG, who said that an SOA fee now is $5,500, including GST.
Do you know what? That is a magazine article you want in your front office. What you don't want in your front office is the one that says most people believe advice is $300. Because as you would know from anchoring, Daryl, it doesn't even have to be a well-constructed number. if there's a number, even random numbers, people anchor to random numbers. I mean, like I often do an experiment when I've done pricing workshops. It's like, what would you pay for a jacket, like a nice leather jacket, Daryl? What would you pay?
A few $100s.
Okay. Chloe?
Yeah, the same.
Same. Elizabeth?
Probably 800.
Yeah. What's the difference? Why are some people 200 people and some people like, I'm closer to you, by the way, Elizabeth. I actually was closer to 500, but you said 800s and I'm thinking 600 to 700. So it's like different people are anchored to different things. Different people, maybe Elizabeth had the experience of buying a really good jacket for 800. Maybe she had the experience of buying a not so good jacket. So she's anchored to that. I know I've got friends who live in New York who will think nothing of laying down $1,500 for a winter jacket because, you know, when it's cold in New York, $1,500 for a winter jacket seems very, very inexpensive. Similarly, yeah, some people buy Mercedes, and some people are more than happy with the Skoda. It's all different. Chloe, what about you?
Heaps of things. The things I've probably written the most notes about are more about being in the moment. Don't believe what your brain is telling you, and don't assume the worst case scenario in terms of questions asked, especially around fees.
Yeah, I reckon that's the number one thing to start with, which is it's like, particularly in fee conversations, it's not about you. It's a commercial decision. Like if a client goes, I don't want to pay that, it's like, I understand. What can I do to help? I mean, that's a great question because it puts them straight back on them. I was told once, if you ever got those high D, the communicators are very direct. Someone said, if you ever get, so this is the disc communication model. They said, if you ever get one of those guys going, it's great, but I'd like a discount. You just look at them and go, I appreciate you asking, and just shut up. And it works brilliantly because that particular personality type, they like to have a little bit of pushback. But yeah, perfect. Elizabeth, how about you?
I think the reminder about biases is really good.
Yeah, it is good. Cool. What I want to do is I want to share with you a couple of templates. They kind of one of them comes off the back of a conversation and the other one is kind of preluding to a conversation. And then we might just go through and workshop a few conversations and maybe have just a little discussion about how we'd approach them using some of these frameworks. That sound good? The first one is called the red carpet exit. And I will provide you with this template because it's one of my favorites. The businesses that have grabbed it and used it, I don't know whether we use this one, Daryl, or a variation on it, but often find that as a result of this exit, clients end up coming back for further advice. But this is one of those conversations where you've had a conversation with a client about either they are not pulling they're not doing what you need to do as a client. They're not getting you back the information. They're not responding. They're whatever it might be. Or alternatively, you've just made a decision on behalf of the business that they're not the right person to work with you. Make sense? And you follow it up with, so, dear Chloe, I'm just picking your name. So, firstly, I want to say thank you very much for entrusting us to work with you and provide financial advice over the last few years. It's been a pleasure, and I wanted to close off that chapter by outlining very clearly. My personal view is there's two things that people remember when they work with you. They remember the beginning, they remember the first thing, they remember the last thing. Does that make sense? We tend to. That's why if you're interviewing candidates, you should always be very careful that you assess all the candidates. Otherwise, you'll just remember the first one and the last one, and that's a bias in itself. Recency and primacy and recency. So my view on that is always make the onboarding of a client an absolute amazing experience and always make the offboarding an absolutely amazing experience because that's what brings them back. Right, Daryl? Yeah. As you'll be aware, the decision has been taken. We'll no longer work together and the provision of financial services will cease as of the date on this letterhead. The reason for this is we require level of engagement. You've indicated you prefer to seek advice, whatever it might be. There's some options there. Accordingly, we will now cease to be your financial advisor and provide financial advice and financial services. What this means in practical terms, from this point onwards, responsibility for management of your financial affairs, any decisions that are made, etc., it falls under the responsibility of you and your advisor. As we would any client past or present, we remind you that ongoing monitoring of your plan is absolutely essential to be able to make changes needed along the way and ensure you get to your end goal, which is ultimately our wish for everybody. If you've been unable to find an advisor, I'd be happy to help. Just confirmation the table below is the revenue you've paid. Furthermore, any accounts that were previously managed for you will be turned over to you should you need to engage with the product provider or get information. Finally, I want to let you know it's been a pleasure. Should you decide you wish to re-engage on another matter, be welcome to talk about what we can do. Other than that, all the best for the future. Now, what's going on here is a bit of the walk away strategy, as well as combined with a bit of loss aversion. Because for many clients, this is a realization that, oh, I'm on my own. but also that you are not just comfortable to walk away from it, but you're happily disengaging. In other words, it's not, and you're also giving me a sense that this is not your first rodeo. And Daryl, did you want to talk a little bit about your experience, or would you prefer not to?
I'm quite happy to. I mean, it's not a regular thing that we do.
Yeah.
We try and sort the wheat from the chaff at the outset rather than during the relationship. But I've had a case recently where a client was paying me $3,300 and, she's struggling to pay that sort of money because there's not much farm. Husband's dying. She's on an average income, doesn't have all the money with us. And we agreed that, it's best to part ways because she wanted to cash out the husband's allocated pension and put that against the mortgage, which made a lot of sense with rising rates. And, she's in her 60s and coming up retirement and there's still got a $400,000 on mortgage. So she said, look, we'll have an exit meeting in December. And if I do need you in the future, I'll come back to you. But she's also helping a family friend of hers and she'd referred the family friend to us. And just a few weeks after that, we had the fee increase conversation with the family friend. And, she said, look, even the fees you're charging Lorraine now are not where the market is. And we really appreciate, despite the increase, that, your fees are fair and reasonable.
Lovely. Yeah. And I've had so many businesses who've done it this way and got on the front foot. And then sure enough, what happens is the clients go out and they realize, you treat them, firstly, there's a fairness to it, which means there's no hard feelings. But secondly, often clients go out and they realize the grass wasn't greener after all. And they come back. And once the client comes back, they're yours for life. They really are. Is that helpful? This is another one that we used increasingly when FOFA first came in. And it's really about when you've got a client who, when you've got a client for whatever who hasn't transitioned to a new way of doing things, another kind of client this is often relevant for is a client who they've kind of got that hands off version where they're going, you do it for me, which I think might have worked not that long ago, but nowadays it's kind of harder and harder to do. And it's, look, firstly, I want to say thank you very much for entrusting us to work with you. I also want to get in the front foot with communicating some key areas I'd like to discuss about how we can best work together. As you may have been aware, the last few years have seen many changes within the financial service industry, ranging from education standards, reporting of revenue, the way advice is delivered and documented. In other words, you're sort of breaking down why things have happened. The impact of these on advice businesses like ours has been a need to adapt and change and ultimately undertake a detailed review. This isn't to say what we did before wasn't what we believed anything other than good advice. Merely, we think the way moving forward is positive. This is a line for businesses who potentially are moving from, a reactive model to something that's more proactive. As such, one of the things that's changed is the need to ask our clients to be more involved in the process and maintain more active engagement. As such, we're having this conversation because I'd like to ensure that what we're doing is aligned with the outcomes you're seeking. In essence, the way we've engaged before is no longer an option. And with your agreement, I'd like to spend some time reviewing the basis on which we're working together. As a result of our discussion, we decide that's not right for you. I'll do my best to help you find a way of work. So again, a way of having a conversation with a client who you need them to come across to your way of thinking. You need them to move across in a respectful way, but also challenges. It's not just about, I want you to, we're not working like that or we don't charge that fees. It's about, there's a reason we're doing this and a reason why we have that conversation. Is that useful? Cool. I'm going to bring this one out and then we'll do a bit of a brainstorm. I always like this as an explainer because the fee conversation, the price conversation, the value conversation is key. But I can't remember who I first heard this from, but it's a really good way of looking at it. And the breakdown, price, cost, value, and opportunity. And it says over here, you've got sort of negativity, negative or downside. And up here, we've got positive value and upside. Price is the outlay required to get access to a utility. In other words, advice has a price. And in order to get access to that advice, you have to pay the price. If you don't pay the price, you can't get the advice. It should be a wrapper. Does that make sense? Cost is what's at risk. So if you get the advice and you don't implement it, the price is the cost. Does that make sense? If you buy a piece of furniture and it breaks immediately and you can't get a refund, it costs you $2,000. The price was $2,000 and the cost was $2,000. But value is a completely different thing. The value is the potential or actual benefit realized. And ideally, if you're outlining a price, the goal in most cases is to achieve value. Like the reason people buy a home or investment property, probably is a better one, is because they outlay price in order to get value in terms of capital growth and income. Does that make sense? Similarly, the reason why cars are a terrible investment is while the value might be, enjoying driving and all the rest of it, ultimately, the price you're paying is the maximum. I mean, you're never going to get that much value back from it again. Does that make sense? The final piece is opportunity cost, which is if you choose not to pay the price for advice, potentially you could get value by doing it yourself. But what I do know is if you choose not to pay the price, then you can almost guarantee you will not get the opportunity to contribute in that value. And your value might be reduced. In which case, let's say your value is reduced. You do it yourself and you only get that much value, in which case your opportunity cost is the gap between what could have been and what actually is. And I think whether you explain it to client in this level of detail, I think it's good. I've always found it good to be able to come into a conversation and going, yes, that's what the price is, but there's a value benefit. If I work with a business, that's the cost of coaching. But if we implement this, this, and this, my expectation is the value to your business in year one will be this. And by the way, that's compounding. And you can go and do it yourself. But my question to you is, if you don't unlock that value, you've lost the opportunity to do so. Make sense? Okay, cool. That's sort of the part of it I wanted to sort of structure. Let's unpack some other awkward conversations that you might be having or might be coming up. And let's talk about how we'd approach this. Chloe, I'm going to lean on you because you sort of mentioned that you've got some that you've got in mind. What are those conversations? What's an example of an awkward conversation that you want to apply a strategy to?
Probably the two main ones are the one I've already talked about, the fees, and approaching that.
Okay.
Another one, which really comes into the red carpet exit, is meeting a new client and it not being a client that I want to take on board or our business wants to take on board. Okay,
cool. Not a fit. Cool. All right. Any others? Elizabeth, are there any you want to add to the pile?
It's a peer thing where someone is actually, that they're misrepresenting what they do. And
professionally?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, with someone who I really respect. Yeah.
I've had that situation with I sat down with a client of mine a while ago, and they had a strategic partner who they knew hadn't brought their business up to speed on what needed to happen moving forward. In other words, they were still doing things in a really, really old-fashioned way, and they were charging premium fees for it. And under the best interest duty, it was like, well, I can't really refer clients through to them if I know that they're overpaying for something. That's an example of yeah. Darryl, how about you?
I'm fine, Stu. I think I've had all the difficult conversations in our relationship going back to March last year. And the one that sticks in my mind is the one that I had pretty much first up and my biggest client. And she said she was leaving. And of course, I ran that past you.
Yeah, that was.
And then she came back.
And that's a good example because I know when I get it. Like I've had clients leave in the past, and I'm like, oh, you take it personally, but in that case, like we ran through all the scenarios, we ran through it, and we came to the conclusion it had nothing to do with you, and it was everything to do with something else that was going on in the background.
Well, the issue was that she'd been lulled into a false sense of security about what real fees were. The office had taken her from just under $1 million in 1986 to $8.5 million last year. And the fees hadn't really gone up commensurately. So we were getting $6,000 for managing $8.5 million, my biggest client. And in the meantime, had she gone anywhere else, and she did, fees would have been probably 5 times that, maybe more. Yep. And clearly she went and knocked on a few doors. She lives in Brighton in Melbourne, some great financial planning firms in Brighton charging great fees. And then she sent a letter of apology back, and we doubled the fees from 6 to 12. So she's still getting an absolute bargain.
Yep. And
there are other clients with half funds under management who are paying me twice as much and not complaining about it. But, there's a classic case of someone testing the market and realizing that she was paying us nothing.
100%. So let's start with the fee one. What's the conversation specifically, or what's the question that you think is going to spark the conversation?
So the one specifically for me is that we are now looking to charge an upfront fee for risk-only clients, which is something we've never done before. And we've just had to do that based on the current, market in that industry and how much difficulty we're having putting that cover in place and the time we're spending on it.
Okay, cool. So have you had any feedback on that so far?
So there's only one client that we've started because it is so new. It's only in the last sort of 3 weeks. And the conversation went okay. I can't imagine it going as well in the future. It'll just be pushed back, which is, potentially a good thing maybe if we if they're not willing to be engaged and put that cover in force. So
first thing, to me, this is anchored. If they're anchored in the idea that you don't pay for insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'd recognize that that's where they're anchored from. So the first thing I'd probably seek to do is, in order to break or address that anchor, you have to demonstrate that the situation as it was before is not the situation as it was now, right? And you could even acknowledge it. You could go, if they turn around and say, hold on, why are you charging an upfront fee for insurance? You go, you know what? That's something I get asked by a lot of clients, and I understand where that comes from because it's something that is relatively new in the industry. But let me explain. The insurance industry has changed quite a bit. The amount of work that's required to go in to get insurance has changed quite a bit, but also the value of getting the right insurance in place is really, really key. And one of the things we do is because to be frank, because we spend so much time in this space and we know the value of having this in place, if you don't, we have to start charging, we would not be able to do it anymore. Would you rather do it yourself or would you rather have someone like us do it for you?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's, again, that there at the end there's a little bit of side, is it what I call it? Side chair strategy. And that's another way of doing it, by the way. A good technique, I didn't even cover that one, is if you want someone to do something, offer them 2 options, the option you want and the terrible version of it that nobody's going to want to do. I said to my kids, would you like to go upstairs to bed now and read for a bit? Or would you like to go upstairs to bed right now and not read at all? Okay, Dave, we'll go upstairs and read a bit. Does that help?
Yeah.
Would you add anything to that, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just say that if they did it themselves, they could end up with a more expensive policy and a poorer policy, which is an absolute fact. Because if they went on to Good Morning Australia and purchased real insurance or something like that, you are paying more. The policy is not as good as an individually underwritten policy. And the claims payments percentage is lower than a policy that we would make a claim for the client on. So again, what you're doing is, I think you're positioning the alternative not being as good. Then they'd have to spend the time to do it themselves. How valuable is the time? And one of the things that we can demonstrate to them is we actually canvass the market. So we use Risk Researcher here, where we put it through the system and, we get a rating on the insurance product, we get the premiums on the insurance product, and that's how we arrive at the cheapest. The other thing is it is complex getting insurance. And if they went and did it themselves, maybe they might not be underwritten at the start, which means that at claim time, they could be rejected. So you think you're covered, and then you're not covered. How would you feel if that happened to you, right? So you put all these scenarios to them and you build the picture of the alternative versus what you're doing and the value you're actually adding. And then in comparison to everything you're doing, whatever the fee is, $500, $1,000, whatever you're charging, starts to look really minuscule. The other thing I'd put in there is if they DIY'd it, how do they know they've got the right amount of cover and the right cover? And what do I mean by that? They might have taken $1 million of life insurance out because real insurance says, you can afford $1 million for $5 a week. But hang on, did I need $1 million?
Yeah.
But Chloe will tell me all I need is $500,000. But I've gone and taken $1 million now, and I paid more, and I haven't been underwritten at the start. The other thing is, what insurance am I missing? is income protection more important than life insurance? Because I might die, but I can't work and my income stops and I've got to go on disability support pension, right? That's $25,000 a year. My income is $91,000, which is the average income, by the way, at the moment around the country, right? So I think it's incumbent upon us to justify our fee by pointing out what we actually do and what the alternative is.
I love it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
There's another one you just asked. Do you know what assessed at the time of claim means? Because that's a lot of these cheaper insurance policies. They don't actually assess them until it comes time to claim, and they don't get paid. There's also, I think, a bunch of stats out there about the number of claims that are paid out when they're under advice versus the number of claims that are paid out directly, and that's worth leaning on. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
APRA have got the stats. If you get on the, I think there was a paper, again, I've got it collected somewhere, of direct policies versus advisor policies versus group policies and the payouts on all of them. And there are clearly some big differences there.
Cool. There's a great conversation. I think it was Mark Andreessen who was telling a story about an employee who busted into his office in Silicon Valley and just lost it at his boss. You're an idiot. And Mark Andreessen sat there listening to him and he was like, he chose not to lose his temper because at that moment he was like, I don't feel this way about that the same way that this person does. So what information do I have that they're missing? And the moment you can identify if people's reactions are different, it means that they've interpreted the information differently or they're missing information. And sometimes when you go, the reason you see it that way, could it be because you don't know about this or don't know about that? I reckon that's concerning, but I dive deep and work out, why am I interpreting it differently? And more importantly, why aren't they interpreting it the way I am? New client, not a fit. I'm kind of wondering about that. I mean, I know in your particular situation, it's a network thing, but I'm wondering if deep down underneath all of that, there's a concern that by rejecting a client, you're actually doing the wrong thing by them. Okay. So is there also an assumption there that there's no one else who can help?
Potentially. It could just be a very personal thing too, of not, like, probably just coming to the realization that you can't be all things for all people.
You can't. And the truth is that, I mean, in my experience, it's the people who have wanted to help the most, and I've done the work for free, they're the ones who are least grateful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I have this belief everybody deserves to be treated with respect, but not everybody's going to be treated equally as part of the process. And there are some people who you can help, and there's some people who you can help, but the help is going to be, you need some help of someone else. And to me, I think the best way of having a conversation with a new client is not a fit, whilst still holding on to that value of wanting to help people, is take some time and see if you can find someone who can help them. Like, literally, it's, okay, if I understand that this is the situation and these are the barriers, okay. Well, I'm going to give you these notes, but the truth is that I'm probably not the best person to help you with this for a whole bunch of reasons. What I'd like to do, though, I'm going to give you these notes. So hopefully you've got clarity of what the issue is. I'm going to speak to a few people and see if there's somebody I can refer you through to who can specialize in this. Does that work for you? Great. And I think if you genuinely want to help, if you sort of don't have time for it, then come up with some people who can help and sort of pre-refer out. But if you go away and just kind of have a look, spend a bit of time and find someone to refer them onto, then you never know. You might find out that ends up being the thing they come back to and say, thank you very much for helping me with that. As opposed to, if you flip it around, no problem, Elizabeth. What happens if they go through your process and then you put the fee in front of you put the fee in front of them, and then suddenly they're in a situation where they feel obligated because you've helped them all this way, and suddenly they can't pay the fee. That can sometimes be an even worse experience for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I've had experience where I'm going through a process and then they pop the fee on the table. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to pay that for this. And you want to disengage pretty quickly and never speak to someone like that again. So does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I've run well over, but hopefully this has been useful. I'm not going to have the action plan. I've really enjoyed this. Hopefully you have. Is there anything else anybody else wants to cover, or have we ticked all the boxes for today? Beautiful. Ladies and gents, thank you very much for joining me on there. Thank you for joining me on it too, Jen. I hope you have a great Thursday. If you're joining me for the drop-in tomorrow,
Thank you. It was really good. Thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate it. See ya. There you have it, good people, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dogs and cats. I don't think there's many dogs and cats listening. Let's be really, really honest about that. I hope you got a lot out of difficult conversations. As I said at the beginning, I think getting good at difficult conversations is not just a good skill to have as an advisor. or an accountant or a broker. It's a good skill to have as a business person. And more than that, it's a fantastic skill to have as a human being, because being able to have real, open, honest, respectful conversations about difficult topics in difficult circumstances, but come out the other end of it looking with a better relationship than you had when you went in. I just think it's one of those life skills that is worth investing time to learn. As always, if you've liked it, please leave some feedback. If you particularly like this and you've liked what you've heard and you decide that not only do you want to hear this stuff, you'd like to be able to see it and get the tools and work with me to implement it, get access to the project plan and create a plan with me and get access to everything else that you get when we work together as part of the coaching program. Feel free to head over to our website, ourdairy.com.au. Check out the programs. There's 3 of them. Foundations, Evolution, and of course Excellence, which is our brand new program. By the way, if you're a BDM or a representative of a product institution or platform provider, please get in contact, because you have a huge role to play in this. And I'm going to be working start with about 5 BDMs who want to become a central figure in the business success of certain practices that they want to work with, or they already work with and they want to add value to. I'd like to chat to you, because I think we can do something together that can be very, very special, and that's through the Practice Excellence program. But anyway, that's it from me. As always, please keep listening. If you like the podcast, share it with others, because the more, the merrier. Other than that, I'll speak to you soon.